Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining in for Diversity, Aging, and Living in Long-Term Care Homes, Considerations for Care Practitioners. My name is Holly Hebner. I'm a project coordinator with the Ontario Centres for Learning, Research, and Innovation in Long-Term Care, hosted at the Research Institute for Aging, and I'll be your moderator this morning. While I introduce the Ontario CRI program, feel free to print the slide handout as well as the activity sheet that we've uploaded in the handouts box in the panel on the right-hand side of your screen. This webinar is brought to you by the Ontario CRI program that strengthens quality of life and care for residents across the province. We do this by providing education and training, sharing research and innovations, identifying and developing resources for long-term care homes. The program partners with the long-term care sector and aims to provide solutions for priority issues, including an aging population, increasing care complexity, and workforce excellence. We are funded by the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Long-Term Care and hosted at 3 different sites: Baycrest Health Sciences in Toronto, Briere in Ottawa, and the Schlegel UW Research Institute for Aging in Waterloo. This work is supported in part with funding from the Government of Ontario through the Ontario Centres for Learning, Research and Innovation in Long-Term Care. The views expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the views of the province. Our presenters today are Kimberly Lopez, Assistant Professor in the Department of Recreation and Leisure Studies at the University of Waterloo, and Ashley Flanagan, a PhD candidate in Aging, Health and Wellbeing, also at the University of Waterloo. Kim and Ashley are both a part of our Supporting Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Committee that you see pictured here. Our members include residents and long-term care team members, along with representation from Advantage Ontario and Ontario Long-Term Care Association, Ontario Association of Residents Councils, Family Councils Ontario, and the Ontario government. Together, we identify, create, and spread resources that support diversity and inclusion in Ontario long-term care homes. The group also informs diversity across all CLRI initiatives. This past year, the committee has been developing a toolkit that will help guide the long-term care homes through their journey to creating an inclusive and welcoming environment for residents, team members, and the larger community. The toolkit will be launched this spring, so keep an eye out on our website and social media channels for the announcement. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley and Kim now.
Thanks, Holly, and hi, everyone, and good morning. It's so great to have so many people here to talk about such an important topic, one that both Kim, my co-presenter, and I are passionate about: diversity, aging, and living in long-term care homes. This presentation will focus on facilitating conversations about diversity and supporting considerations for care practitioners currently working in long-term care homes. We would like to thank fellow members of the Ontario CLRI Supporting Diversity and Inclusion in Long-Term Care Advisory Group for contributing to this presentation. Kim and I will do more formal introduction in a moment, and we're looking forward to introductions from you. But first, we would like to do a territorial land acknowledgement to open our session today.
Hi, everyone. I echo Ashley's welcome. My name is Kim, and it's my honor to begin the session by acknowledging the land and the caretakers of this land, both past and present. We acknowledge the RIA and the University of Waterloo, including the Waterloo, Kitchener, and Cambridge campuses. The land on which we live and work is situated on the Haldimand Tract, land promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River, and is the traditional territory of the neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. As we are beneficiaries and as occupants of this territory, it's important to pay homage to the land and the peoples who afforded us these possibilities and privileges. If you would like to learn more about the land acknowledgement pertinent to your area, please feel free to visit the website posted on the screen at www.cot.ca/content/guide acknowledging First Peoples traditional territory.
Today, we hope our presentation facilitates understandings of the diverse social identities, the ways that diverse social identities may influence our individual acknowledgement of marginalization and social difference, the ways social identity plays a part in professional roles, and to develop awareness to concepts and principles of diversity and inclusion.
Following the presentation, we hope that you will use this material to reflect on taken for granted assumptions, unconscious bias, and the roles and responsibilities we all have as partners in care in supporting diversity in long-term care homes. We understand that putting yourself out there can be risky. So to best support productive discussion in the chat box space, I'd like for us to consider some language to guide our interactions during our activities. Our intention with these strategies, or with this strategy rather, is to suggest respectful ways of acknowledging the diversity of thought. Based on our experiences, we find it is helpful in supporting democratic and a free from climate in our classrooms and workshops. For better or for worse, we fundamentally support the freedom of expression. However, we will not tolerate expressed intolerance guised in the freedom of expression that infringes on rights, privileges, and freedoms of an individual in our discussion space. Specifically, we expect that with you, we together will strive to create a space that's free from hate through discrimination, intimidation, exploitation, violence, bullying, and harassment. You are welcome to connect with us offline if you experience discomfort or are witness to interactions that violate our free from climate. To support our constructive learning and feedback, we use the oops and ouch approach. Oops and ouch assumes that everyone is here to learn. So if things are not phrased in a way that is aligned with your own position, feel free to express why it's hurtful or offensive in a way that focuses on the issue and not the person. If someone feels hurt or offended by another person's comment, the hurt person can say ouch. In acknowledgement, the individual who has made the hurtful comment says oops. If necessary, there can be further dialogue about this exchange. You're welcome to put your own spin on this language or reuse your own mechanism for feedback in your own work. It's just one tool that you are welcome to use in your own context, as we found it useful in our past experiences. So hello again and welcome. As mentioned, I am one of your facilitators today. My name is Kim. My given name is Kimberly, and I work as an assistant professor in the Department of Recreation and Leisure Studies at the University of Waterloo. My research program addresses inequities faced by women of color in particular in who are working in helping professions. Personally, I identify as a settler of colonized history and a woman of color. I use she, her, hers pronouns. And why this topic is important to me is because I feel that I live the realities of labeling and am impacted by stereotypes, acts of racism, sexism, ableism, and other acts of injustice. As an advocate, I'm committed to supporting community and inclusion through my work and in my leisure.
Hi again, everyone. My name is Ashley, but you can call me Ash. And I'm a PhD candidate in aging health and well-being at the University of Waterloo. I work with 2S LGBTQIA+ older adults to explore experiences navigating community and/or aging care. I identify as a queer woman of Irish and Dutch descent. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And this topic is important to me because as a queer woman who has spent a number of years working in retirement and long-term care, I have seen and experienced the impact of homophobia, transphobia, and other acts of injustices within these settings. As an advocate, I am also committed to supporting community and inclusion through my work and leisure. So, as promised, it's now time for our introduction exercise. The format for introductions that Kim and I just modeled is included on the slide. So things like I identify as, your name, pronouns, your affiliation, and what brought you to this webinar. If you don't know or feel comfortable with which identifiers that are appropriate or useful for your introduction, not to worry. We have included a list of commonly used pronouns on the box in the slide in front of you. But before beginning the exercise, I want to make a quick note about pronouns. Some of you may have heard about or been part of a recent movement to incorporate pronouns into introductions. And as part of this movement, you may have heard folks asking about preferred pronouns. And this topic is something that I like to get a little serious about, but I want to stress that it's to do your best not to use the preface preferred when it comes to pronouns, since when we're asking for pronouns, they are a part of our identities. They are not a preference. So when asking about pronouns, simply inquire about pronouns. So now, using the format for the introduction on the current slide, we invite you to introduce yourself in the chat box to the right if you feel comfortable doing so. For folks who may not be comfortable participating via the chat box or are joining us as part of a larger group, you are also welcome to practice your introduction by either writing it out by yourself or saying it out loud with your group. We will now give you all a couple minutes to do this and participate in a way that is most meaningful for you.
All right, so I'm just going to play a little music, and feel free to practice on your own, write it out, or practice in your group just like Ashley said. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, thanks everyone for participating. We got a few introductions shared over the chat box. I'm not going to read them out just for confidentiality, but we do appreciate everyone taking the time to introduce themselves to us. I see a few people are from the TRO presentation that Ashley and Kim presented in last year, and we've got people from a variety of long-term care homes across the province, so welcome.
Yes, welcome everybody, and it's good to see that people are feeling comfortable more and more as they practice the various ways of introducing yourselves and getting comfortable with that language and new terminology. We're going to move on to some new useful terms now, specifically around positionality and intersectionality. Intersectionality is the interconnected nature of social categorizations. And we have Black feminist and activist Kimberly Crenshaw to thank for coining the term intersectionality. Intersectionality is closely linked to positionality, which is the socio-political context that influences how we understand identity, or in other words, how categories of social identity are social constructions. We all live within different bodies that occupy different categories of labels. Depending on the context, these multiple labels work to configure different levels of privilege, unearned advantages, and oppression, also unjust untreatment or control. Positionality also describes how identity influences, potentially biases your understanding of and outlook on the world. In the next slide, we'll watch a short video of how positionality affects everyday lived experiences and the ways we can move towards inclusion.
This video was created by the Royal Bank of Canada, and we just want to mention that the CLRI does not have a partnership with RBC or endorse their services, but we thought this video did a great job of illustrating positionality. We also recognize that there is no older adult representation in the video or in any of the other videos that we looked at for the webinar. Ageism is still a very real issue in today's world, and seniors are often overlooked when we speak about diversity and inclusion. And we encourage you to think about the communities we are creating and where we can create space for others' voices to be heard. So I'm just going to launch the video here. Oh, going the wrong way. All right, so the way GoToWebinar works is that video won't actually be recorded into the webinar recording that we'll be sharing with you in a week's time. So what I'm going to do is when the recording is ready, I'll make sure to email a link to that video for all of you. I've also put it into the slides handout, and you can see the YouTube link on the bottom there if you want to search it on your own time.
Thanks, Holly. Taken together, we can think about how privilege, oppression, and the social construction of identities we take up, or our positionality, work together to influence how individuals are perceived. Because our brains like to organize information about the world and are very efficient at doing so, these quote unquote mental shortcuts are sometimes unintentionally applied to individuals. Sometimes these thoughts about a person's attitude or behaviors are called stereotypes. However, these understandings or preconceived notions of people are not only because of stereotypes. Unconscious bias, or bias that is developed as a result of systemic privilege and oppression, also influence how we think and act towards members of particular groups. The video we just watched moved from speaking about the different stereotypes that are applied to individuals to how individuals can think about inclusion of difference by moving past stereotypes and unconscious bias. Dr. Jay Michaela in the Department of Psychology at the University of Waterloo discusses unconscious bias in a very memorable way. He likens unconscious bias to a cake. He says unconscious bias is not like the icing on a cake that you can scrape off. Unconscious bias is baked right into the cake. This means that we can't simply know about our unconscious bias to get rid of it. It is shaped by our culture, norms, and social structures.
So why do we need to understand diversity and inclusion in long-term care homes? Why did so many of you feel that this topic was important? And I think the answer to why me is pretty obvious. It's probably one of the most common reasons why we've all gathered here today. We want to be better, we want to help each other out, we want to respect dignity, and we want to be sensitive. And what about why now? While there are many reasons why now, we have a few examples for why now. More than ever, it is an important moment in time for Canadians to be thinking critically about diversity and inclusion in long-term care.
We shouldn't need to rationalize expressions of self or the need for diversity in long-term care homes. Rather, we should be asking ourselves why now is the most opportune time. These issues are relevant to Canadians for a number of reasons. First, the Canadian population is aging, and the need for care, especially 24-hour care and support, is on the rise. I feel like that's a point that need not be repeated in this particular group with this particular audience. Second, as the Canadian population ages, there is increasing diversity in later life as society normalizes and becomes more welcoming to difference. Third, histories of reproductive work continue to play out into public spheres, which now more than ever will impact the transnationalization of care work. The number of racialized individuals in particular are trending upwards in Canada, 6 times faster or 25% more quickly than Canada's total population. Ignoring labor divisions in this way continues to make gendering and racialization invisible from public scrutiny. As a result, racialized women are increasingly susceptible to the stresses and invisibilities incurred within caring roles. Fourth, given the elusiveness of gender, race, and class stratification in Canada, what we call colorblindness is commonplace and denies historical differences that persist, such as a lack of access to higher education, employment mobility, and adequate social assistance for racialized individuals due to sociopolitical and economic disparities. This brings us to our first consideration, sensitivity, not competency. In thinking deeply about language, let's consider being sensitive to rather than competent in one's culture, race, ability, and class, among others. Sensitivity to diversity is a value that is thought about frequently and woven into an organization's culture rather than a one and done. I have enough competency training and I get it. As a person of color myself, I do not consider myself quote unquote competent in understanding the experiences of 2S LGBTQIA identified older adult or an Aboriginal elder. I do, however, consider myself to be critically sensitive to the individual's life stories and how each story may or may not sit apart from dominating identities, ideologies, and ways of aging in Canada. We should constantly be learning as each person's needs for inclusion are different. Critical sensitivity is something I choose to use in my own practice. And to me, being critically sensitive to diverse ways of being as an older adult means, number one, critiquing structures that intentionally or not homogenize or make all aging experiences the same. In other words, to make this experiences of aging across people all the same, and asking number two, how to support individuals in a relational way. Part of thinking about sensitivity involves our other two considerations, checking bias and developing supports focused on individual needs. So what are our responsibilities when it comes to diversity and inclusion in long-term care homes? We're going to pull up a poll now that invites you to learn a little bit more. So by law, we as partners in care in long-term care homes are responsible for option A, supporting residents in activities of interest in their community. Option B, including cultural, spiritual, and religious interests in residents' care plans. Option C, long-term care homes must meet residents' cultural, spiritual, and religious interests. Or option D, all of the above.
All right, so we'll give you a few moments to select your option and then we'll share it and you can see the results. A few more seconds. All right, thank you for participating.
So it looks like many of you chose option D, all of the above, which is the correct answer. According to a number of the sections in the Long-Term Care Homes Act and the Resident Bill of Rights, it is our responsibility to provide all of the above options through, to residents of long-term care homes. You'll see on the slide that is entitled Checking the Balances that it outlines a number of different sections in the Long-Term Care Home Act, specifically sections 25, 26, and Ontario Regulation 7910 that discuss where our responsibilities lie as partners in care living in long-term care homes. So for example, section 26 of the Long-Term Care Home Act states that every residence care plan must use interdisciplinary assessment of specified care domains, including cultural, spiritual, and religious preferences and age-related needs and preferences. So it's not just a responsibility of one interdisciplinary team care member or another, it's all of our collective responsibility as partners in long-term care to support residents in their pursuits related to cultural, spiritual, and religious preferences while living in long-term care. And the question that we'd like for you to reflect on is, are these promises being met? Diversity of all needs to be considered if we're to create cultures of caring that are inclusive. While the first consideration asks us to consider sensitivity over competency, the second consideration asks us to reflect on our own assumptions, where we've been rooted differently from individuals we encounter and care with. When we think back to our cake and the poll we took earlier, practicing person first in relationship-centered care involves thinking about what we need to know as partners in care and what we don't need to know in order to provide the best possible care.
To help us think through our assumptions and biases, we've created a quick guided reflection or self-assessment activity. So referencing the handout that was distributed in advance of this webinar, I'm going to guide you through 5 questions, leaving time for individual reflection between each question. So I'll give you a minute just to pull up the handout if you don't have it, and then I'll start in with the first question. So the first question is, what is my definition of diversity? So I'll give you about 30 seconds to a minute to think about it, and we'll play some music while you think. The next question, what assumptions might I have about various aspects of diversity? Okay. Question 3, where do I think these assumptions came from? They may come from places like friends, relatives, television, or movies. So reflect on where you think these assumptions may have came from. Question number 4, how do I interact with coworkers, residents, and other folks involved in the long-term care home based on these assumptions? And finally, what steps do I need to take to learn about positionalities that are different from my own?
Thanks very much for sharing your reflections. It's really great to see that some of you have already thought about the structures that are very limiting, that kind of work outside of our power to limit how we think about diversity and inclusion in long-term care homes. Connected to the last reflection question, this slide shows a sampling of the many ways positions can be layered on top of one another to express intersectionality. The different ways intersectionality can be expressed or shown on the slide. And while some labels are useful for care workers to provide the best possible care, some labels and information may not be. Please note that this slide is limited in the labels that are taken up on a day-to-day basis. When developing a relationship with a resident, which social positions do you believe are relevant to the provision of the best possible care, and which are not? So when you think about your day-to-day interactions with residents and your fellow staff members and colleagues, which do you feel are important to the provision of day-to-day care and which are not?
Okay, so now that we've talked about and thought a little bit more about diversity and the various social positions we bring to our caring and working relationships, there may be a number of challenges to expression as these intersecting identities, to the expression of these intersecting identities within long-term care homes. For example, we may experience attitudinal barriers, things like, we don't have any gay residents here, or I don't feel I'm culturally competent enough. There may be things like lack of resources, whether those are actual or perceived. Things like time, money, human power, or I'm not sure I'm the quote unquote right person to support you with this. And there are also varying levels of risk that also exist within long-term care homes, whether that is actual or perceived risk. So things like discrimination or hate, victimization and isolation, or things like, I'm not sure I want to stand out within or between my colleagues and residents. And finally, I may be fearful that I'll be treated differently. So these are some of the things that we may consider as we're working on our journeys towards embracing diversity and inclusion and challenges to expression within long-term care homes. So now that we've thought a little bit more about this, how do we address and potentially move through some of these challenges? And this leads us to our final consideration, considering where and how to access appropriate resources. This can, in part, be facilitated by our friends at the CRI supporting diversity and inclusion in long-term care homes advisory group. So at the end of our presentation, we'll have some links to the website and also various social media resources that can help support you on your journeys towards diversity and inclusion.
All right. So to tie our considerations together, let's look at the following case study provided on your handout and on the current slide. I'll read the case study and then we can take some time to think about the questions in the reflection on the right side of the screen. Kwame is an 83-year-old man who is Caribbean Canadian, single, heterosexual, with substance use challenges, and was without permanent residence due to complications of post-traumatic stress disorder from military missions overseas. He receives some income from the Ontario Disability Support Program, and he has recently moved into a long-term care home. During the first care conference with Kwame's care team, the recreation therapist shares details about his socioeconomic status, mental health, and previous alcohol use. These details are interrupted by another member of the care team who says, "We don't have time for all these details," and moves on to Kwame's clinical care needs. We'd like you to reflect on the following questions in the discussion chat box to the right. What are the challenges faced by the practitioner in the scenario? What, if anything, is being ignored, dismissed? Why is this information important? Is there information that is not important for the care team to make decisions at this time? When does it become important, and if at all? And finally, what action should be taken and in what manner? So we'll give you time now to think about these questions, whether you're working by yourself or with a group, and feel free to use the handout to fill in some of your reflections on this case study.
So we'll play some music again. I hope you're not all sick of the tune that I chose, and we'll also leave a few moments at the end to share some of your responses with Ashley and Kim and everyone else who's on the line. I see some responses coming through already, so I'm just going to read out a few. Let's see here. One person said, the challenge being the attitudes of the care team member that negates the information as not important or not worthy of the time in the consideration of the care plan when it is essential. An answer to question number 2, the care team member, if medical care team member has duties to clinical part, often they are too busy, time constraints to allow them to consider all factors. The long-term care home should ensure time and effort is put towards this to eliminate. The challenges faced by the practitioner in this scenario is not being allowed the time to learn important details about Kwame. We don't know about Kwame's current state and support system. I would advocate for Kwame by stating that his psychosocial details and are important to understanding his clinical care needs. Someone says, I can't tell if this is a dismissal or an ignore, as we do not have all the details. Why the person wanted to dismiss why did this person want to dismiss the information? The team member is being closed-minded. Kwame's personhood is being dismissed. All known info regarding Kwame should be shared as early as possible to avoid avoid best suitable care for Kwame. Someone should explain to the member of the care team why this info is important and how it pertains to Kwame's personhood. Someone said for question 2, in recreation, they call it finding the key to the person, understanding their life story and how details will inform their needs and interaction with staff and other residents. I think that's a really nice way to put it, the key to the person. The actions taken should be education and awareness of how it pertains to care and wellness, definitely. And I think we'll leave it there as I don't see anything else coming through. So feel free to take it away.
Sure. So thank you for your participation on this reflection activity on Kwame. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. So we felt also that the challenges faced by the practitioner is that other information is relevant to Kwame's care plan. Related to question 2, Kwame was without permanent residence, had PTSD, and is Caribbean Canadian. We felt this information was important because he may experience challenges in a routinized home system. Related to question 3, we felt that ethnicity and his PTSD are important, and that all the information that was provided, while limited, it was important at this time. His religious affiliation may also be important, but this information was not included at the moment. His substance use, PTSD, religious affiliation, and other information will likely become more relevant as he begins to settle into long-term care. And regarding what action should be taken and in what manner, a gentle reminder that psychosocial details are important for setting Kwame up for success, as discussed by one contributor, and making him feel welcome and part of the community in long-term care. So really, many of those details were very important to his integration into long-term care and setting him up for success in his new community. Thanks for participating.
Yeah, thank you so much for participating through the various activities and exercises that we've woven into our webinar today. Our goal for today was that this presentation facilitated understandings of the diverse social identities and how they may influence acknowledgement and marginalization, and as well as social difference, and how we all have a role to play in advancing diversity and inclusion in long-term care, as well as the ways that social identity plays a part in our professional roles, and through practicing sensitivity, relationality, and selective disclosure in our will help us to reduce constraints to expression in long-term care. And finally, we hope that we developed an awareness to concepts and principles of diversity and inclusion, including intersectionality, positionality, and the difference between equality and equity.
So again, following the presentation, we invite you to use this material to reflect on taken for granted assumptions, unconscious bias, and the roles and responsibilities you have as care partners for supporting diversity in long-term care homes. I noticed a little typo on the slide, and we'll get that fixed before we send those slides out to you, but definitely to supporting diversity and inclusion in long-term care homes.
Okay, so we're now going to move into the question period of the webinar. And while you type your questions out for Ashley and Kim, I'm just going to remind you of ways that you can connect with the CLRI. We do have a website that's been mentioned a few times during the webinar, and on this website, if you search our Supporting Diversity and Inclusion project, it will take you to the resource page with a number of resources and educational tools to support your diversity journey. We also have a Twitter and a Facebook and a LinkedIn page that you can go to navigate through resources, learning opportunities, and sector news. And you can also sign up to receive updates from us through our monthly e-newsletter, and you can do that by going to our website. We also have a general email that you can email if you want to reach out about things not related to supporting diversity and inclusion, but perhaps other programs that the CLRI offers. And we do have a 1-800 number. I want to remind everybody that this webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting it on our website in a week's time. And we'll also link to the YouTube video that we showed earlier. The slides will be available for download. I saw a few of you are saying that they aren't printing correctly, and I apologize for that. So we'll get that fixed and make sure that it's available. And we'll also have the activity sheet available, and it does have a larger reference to a more fuller case study about Kwame. So you can feel free to maybe do that as an in-service activity with your care teams. And let me see if we've got any questions coming through here. I also mentioned at the beginning that our Supporting Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Committee is in the process of developing a toolkit. This toolkit is going to be launched this spring at the 2020 Advantage Ontario Convention. And so I hope that some of you that have joined us today will take time to attend our session to learn about the toolkit, and you'll be able to take a hard copy away with you. So let's see what we have for questions. So someone's asking the both of you, have you been made aware of the dedicated LGBT long-term care home assist for those who may help experience biases from other residents? Sorry, let me read that again. I'm assuming they're referencing Rakai centers who will be having a dedicated LGBTQ floor in their home for people who identify, and they're wondering, would this structure help the LGBTQ community from your perspectives?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this. The opinions are divided. I think there's some folks that would really thrive and feel comfortable within a dedicated floor or unit or home that is dedicated to folks with 2S LGBTQIA identities. And then there's another side to the debate where folks have expressed opinions that we've been fighting for inclusion our entire lives. So going into a floor or a home that is dedicated isn't something that they're necessarily looking for. I think the bigger and overarching thing is to work on and work towards diversity and inclusion within our homes and long-term care homes as a whole, to make folks feel like they can be who they are, and they can bring their various interconnecting social identities with them, and feel comfortable expressing those within long-term care. So yeah, there are some initiatives out there, and I think it's great to have a variety of options for folks. Yeah.
Kim, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think there are Well, yes, I think there have been a number of different initiatives that have happened across Canada and the States to supplement that movement. And I guess it's really all individual dependent, right? As
Yeah.
Ashley said. Some may prefer not to have that type of, delineation, but others may feel more comfortable with that, more outwardly stated, and have those provisions set up for them in that way. Absolutely, I think all considerations are valid and should be welcomed. And I think we should be more open to, as Ashley said, seeing how we can revise our structures at large to be more welcoming and inclusive in general.
Okay, and for those of you who maybe wonder if there are resources out there for supporting the LGBTQ community in long-term care, the Ontario CLRI did 2 webinars last year with people with lived experience, and you can find those resources on our website. We also have a toolkit as well, or a resource guide rather, that you can download and access to find other resources to support your long-term care home in this journey. And like I said, those are all available on our website for download and for viewing. So another question here. I recently saw someone add their pronouns to their professional signature line. Would you think that this would be a good idea for bringing awareness to this concept?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and it's a very subtle way of bringing awareness. I've seen also some people include their pronouns and then have a link to a website that explains pronouns and what they are and why it's important to also include them in our daily introductions. And because we're so connected through email, those introductions happen in that way. So I think it's a great idea to weave pronouns into your email signature for sure.
I'd agree. I think when we think about how often we use email and how much things through our introductions are, or introductory signatures are normalized through our practice of email, I think it is important to include that type of information. If you feel comfortable having that discussion, to normalize the discussion of pronouns.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Someone's asking what your thoughts on dementia villages when it comes to diversity and inclusion.
Great question. I think when it comes to dementia and diversity, I was going to merge the 2 words into one there. I think we're just starting to feel our way through this intersection in particular. But I think kind of circling back to the overarching conversation of having homes that are inclusive, it does trickle down to resident interactions, and even especially within the dementia units and dementia care units as well. Yeah.
I also think that we would agree that living in the person's moment-to-moment reality and embracing their everyday lived experience, no matter how much that changes and differs from day to day, moment to moment, hour to hour, person to person, is something that we need to be cognizant of and very fluid and accommodating to maintain one's personhood and one's sense of inclusion and their sense of feeling that they are embraced by the long-term care community. So whatever expressions these might look like, I feel have a deep connection to diversity and inclusion, and things that we need all to be sensitive to.
For sure.
Speaking to the dementia villages, the Research Institute for Aging has a research chair named Dr. Alan Power, and he is our research chair in dementia and aging. And he would be someone worthwhile to check out for resources and his opinions on dementia villages. Like Ashley said, not only does the long-term care home need to be inclusive of those living with dementia, but Dr. Alan Power branches that out into that our communities at large need to be more age-friendly and more dementia-friendly so that people can thrive. So I encourage you to go to the RIA website to find out more on Dr. Alan Power's resources. And just going back to the LGBTQ dedicated floor in long-term care, You'll see in the chat box that my colleague Michelle Fleming, who's at Briere doing technical support and sending me your questions, she's put a link to our LGBTQ resources so that you can find them all in one place. So that's www.cri.ltc.ca/LGBTQ. And so you can find all those resources in one place for you to access. And I can also make sure in our follow-up email when the recording is ready that you can, I'll put a link in there so everyone can access those. And that looks like it's brought us to the end of our time here. It is now 11:30 and I understand everyone has very busy schedules. I'd like to thank Ashley and Kim for spending this hour with us this morning. And if you have any further questions about diversity and inclusion in long-term care, you can please, you can contact them directly. I believe they've provided their emails for us, so you can find them on the slide there. You can also contact me directly through the various emails that you've received over the last little while leading up to this webinar. And like I said, this recording will be posted 1 week from today on the Ontario CLRI website, and we hope you enjoyed the morning with us. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.